Wayne County Board of Commissioners is back in session. We do apologize for getting back a little bit late. We got held up by the train, believe it or not.
Yep, that's true.
Mr. Wood, if you would.
Okay,
I think item number 5 is next on the agenda.
this is on the Goldsboro request?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's next.
Yes, sir, that's what I
Okay.
had down. They are supposed to have someone here make a presentation, if you'll go ahead, and then when they finish, I'll give you my recommendation on it.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the Commission. Again, my name is Scott Barnard. I'm the Parks and Recreation Director for the City of Goldsboro. And I'm actually here primarily just to introduce Lindsay Waldron with North Carolina Special Olympics. She's their Vice President of Field Operations, to present to y'all the needs and the current state of Special Olympics here in Wayne County.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So what I wanted to start out with is sharing with you a story on one of our athletes named Tyler Edmondson. I think that most of you know him. He is a very, very productive member of this community and also a Special Olympics athlete. He's recently been selected to go to El Paso, Texas, to participate in the bowling event out there. But unfortunately, this weekend he was involved in a bad accident, and he's in the Chapel Hill Burn Center. And he was asked to come speak with me today, and unfortunately couldn't be here, so I wanted to share his story. But now he is up and walking, because his first question to his mother was, am I still going to be able to go to the bowling event in El Paso, Texas? And so I just wanted to share that with you all, because he follows you and is very political with his opinions. So the other thing is, obviously, is the need for the coordinator position here in Wayne County. I would say that, just want to let you know that a third of our programs across the state, we have 100 counties that have Special Olympics, and a third of those are run through Parks and Rec. And the benefit of that, obviously, is that we have a person on staff through Parks and Rec that can run the programs. Here in Wayne County, there are 11 sports that they do out of our 19 sports, which is quite significant. There are approximately 650 athletes here in Special Olympics, Wayne County. But potentially, when I was pulling the numbers of looking at your county with 124,000 people here, the possibility of the athlete numbers here is about 3,700, where this program could grow with the support of the program being here within. Where it was a volunteer position. Rich Walderman was volunteer coordinator for 10 years. And so he did all that he could do by building a committee, building coaches. It's a very, very strong committee. But with your support and the backing of this position, it will obviously impact a large amount of athletes that are here in this county. Any questions?
Any questions? Mr. Doherty.
So if I'm understanding, when I make a contribution to Special Olympics, or organization or individuals do, you actually don't fund the coordinator on the county level?
Special Olympics?
Yes.
No. No.
Well, how would you possibly have organization and participation on a local level if you didn't have the position?
All of our coordinators across the state, the 100 coordinators that run each county, are volunteers to us.
They're volunteers?
Yeah, they're volunteers. However, 1/3 of those are paid through a Parks and Rec department. So to do what we're wanting to do here in Wayne County, because of the size of the program, the potential growth of the program, where Special Olympics is heading is, is called going to what we call unified sports, to where it's not just benefiting our Special Olympic athletes, but where we are shifting, our entire movement is shifting to where we are doing programming and sports where we have traditional athletes on the same playing field as our Special Olympic athletes. And so it's this huge movement that's happening within Special Olympics, so.
So if I'm understanding, here in Wayne County, it was handled by a volunteer.
Correct.
Is that correct? And his name was
Rich Walderman?
Walderman, Mr. Walderman.
Yes.
And Mr. Walderman decided he no longer could continue to volunteer and coordinate that. Is
Right, that's correct, sir. He served in the position for 10 years as a volunteer and really grew the program for as much work as it is to be a volunteer. I mean, there are certain times of the year leading up to the spring games and whatnot to where you're working 40 to 60 hours just on that, and he wanted to retire, so.
You say it takes 40 to 60 hours per week?
During certain times of the year.
And how long is that span?
I would say, leading up to spring games, and I'm not certain on when the spring games are scheduled for this year, but I would say leading up to the big events that happen, so that would be probably 4 times a year. But then there's also a lot of travel, going to the state level events.
Could you give us more of a specific timeline on how much time is involved?
I cannot, Vice Chairman Cromartie, because, excuse me. Vice Chairman Cromartie, specific to the date start or the time commitment of the staffer?
I thought she said that it worked through the recreation department.
It does not currently, no, sir. Special Olympics up until middle of December have been handled by a volunteer, his wife, and then a committee.
And how many is on the committee?
Roughly 10 to 15 people, and that includes athletes. We always include an athlete or two that serve on the
Well,
committee.
okay, and what I guess I'm getting at, this person devoted 10 years to it. Have you tried to see if there's another person out there who could volunteer? Because there are volunteers for all different kinds of things, and a follow-up to that is, how many potential folk is it out of Wayne County?
3,700 if you pull the census numbers.
And where do they tend to come from? The public schools?
Public schools, but then also your group homes and,
Okay.
just home-based athletes. But a big part of what I think our push with getting the position is to have someone to actually grow the program to where it needs to be able to add more sports, to be able to recruit more coaches. There's a program called Project Unify that exists through the Department of Education that falls under Special Olympics. And currently in Wayne County, because it was run by a volunteer, we don't have any Project Unify schools on board, where we have 230 schools across the state for this year signed up for Project Unify. But it takes a person really dedicated to work with our staff to come in and be able to grow the program where it needs to be.
And I guess my final question is, has your recreation department seeked out a volunteer?
No, sir. The program doesn't exist currently as a Parks and Recreation program under the city of Goldsboro.
The request from the city, and on page 85, the request from the city manager is that you fund half of a full-time position, which they're calling an events coordinator, and that would be, the pay scale would be anywhere from $34,800 to $55,129. So that's the request, as I understand it. Is that correct, Scott?
Yes, sir. That is true.
And it would be created within their Parks and Recreation Department. So it's not there now because it's been held by volunteers.
But I thought I had one final question, but I thought, did you say that about a third of the programs in the state are volunteers and the other 2/3 are within the rec? Maybe I misunderstood
The
that.
other way around, sir.
It's
1/3.
it's 1/3 in the department.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Dart.
My reputation probably preceded me. I'm the guy with the black hat. But at any rate,
Yes, sir.
here's my concern. I don't think it's only this board's concern. It's the concern of the city council. We're in mid-budget, and I'm sure you deal with government entities, and as such, I think you recognize everything revolves around a budget. Now, from reading the article it seems like Mr. Walderman had apprised everyone that he was going to have to end his volunteer as of December. But he let you know this some years back. So the organization was well aware that he, as of December 2014, he no longer was going to be the coordinator. Everyone was aware of that. And it just seems like here, mid-year, mid-budget year, this is thrown out here on the table. And I think the word was bristled from the city council. We don't want to bristle here, but we are concerned that you're right there in the mid-year. And what I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, and in fact, let me put this in the form of a motion, and that is that we currently, my understanding is that the coordinator would work with the Special Olympics and the Senior Games, coordinating those. Since we currently are handling Senior Games, and this board is committed to funding the Senior Games, we will continue to fund that portion of this coordinator of the Senior Games and let the City Council handle the Special Olympics. And that is my motion, Mr. Chairman, that we continue to support that portion, which is one half of the Senior Games, and ask the City Council to take up the issue on the Special Olympics.
I have a motion on the floor. Any other discussion?
If that,
Mr. Marty?
if that was put in place, and then, now, help me, you're the state person, so you're here all the time, right? Now,
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right, I just want to make sure. The motion that Mr. Darty has put in place, which sounds reasonable to me, do you think, because we're gonna fund half of it, so do you, that, if they use the other half, that means that you would get that one full position?
No, that's not my motion.
Well, I mean, if we funded half of it,
We currently already have somebody.
Fund-
We're already funding the senior game.
I know it.
But
But
no,
is
my
that-
motion
but is
is
that-
not to fund half of the position.
No.
It is to continue, as we currently have an organization and someone that's coordinating the Senior Games, we will continue to actually fund that portion
But
through the Senior
I
Center.
thought that I heard or read or somebody said that the Senior Games and the Olympics was a project that worked together. Is that?
I think they're wanting to put it together under a coordinator.
Yeah.
Well,
and
I go back.
Well, the senior games, we contribute to the senior games. My understanding is the city does some as well. But clearly, the senior games is something that we participate in, and we do run the senior center. But we're not in the recreation business per se.
So are you saying that we don't fund any coordination on the Senior Games?
No, I'm saying we do.
We
do.
We do, but so does the city. So I would agree with your motion to do that.
Any other discussion? Mr. Bell?
Let me ask the question before we move on this vote. Have any of y'all ever worked with Special Olympics or been out to see what they do or who it is that we talking about?
Yes, and there is where the real difficulty comes, and that is the easy thing here is just create another position and just go ahead and fund it. That's the easy thing. But there's more at stake here in regards to this position, and it is. It's in mid-budget. You've got two different organizations. You got a county government, a city government. The actual position is funded by the city. There's just a lot of unanswered questions. And so for that reason, I would just like us on the county level to continue with our support and funding that we're doing currently on the Senior Games and allow the city to do what they want to do in regards to Special Olympics.
Could I put Mr. Amendment?
Yep.
Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor?
Okay, I just had a couple of questions. Is there any kind of ordinance or anything that says that the people that give to Special Olympics, can that money be used to pay someone for that, to work in that position? Is there anything that says that you can't use funds that are given to Special Olympics to pay someone to do that particular job?
I would say, no, we don't do that. I can't really answer that because our CEO deals with all of that. The
Okay.
answer was, I can tell you that that does not happen in any of the 100 counties.
Okay, as a follow-up, you do have like a financial officer or a financial secretary?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have, the Special Olympics have a fund balance? Do you have a savings account?
Yes, so Wayne County has their own fundraising that happens here for Special Olympics, and they fund their entire program here. So all the uniforms, equipment, everything is being raised by the committee that I mentioned. There's a volunteer group of people, coaches, parents, and a committee, a very strong one here actually, that does all the fundraising that goes along to support the program.
Okay,
So what you're, excuse me, Mr. Mayor, so what you're saying is local funds that are raised stay local?
Stay local.
So they could,
That's what I
so they
asked
could
this
be
morning.
used.
That's what I was asking this morning.
Mr. Kamar?
Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Attorney, I just want to make sure I'm not ready to put my foot in my mouth. Is it appropriate that I could make an amendment to say, we table this to give our manager, huh?
That's how I'm gonna do the same.
Okay, to give our manager an opportunity to look into the weeds, number one, about the money that may be here. Number two, to see, and I know based upon the many different jobs that I've had, although we have full-time jobs, they may not take up 100% of our time. Full-time versus 100% is two different things. What I would still love to wonder is, though some of those kind of coordination that the senior game may have, I'm just wondering if we might not be able to, dollar-wise, pull a position together using, if that person who's doing our senior games is not 100% occupied, using some of those funds that may be available, and then, since it's going, and if I understand, it's going to wind up inside of the recreation department. Is that true?
That's where I would envision the
Okay,
position,
all
but
right.
if,
I thought that's where it might be winding up at.
Well,
But by the time we finish looking, we might be able to find that person with enough time that would be able to pull these kinds of games together.
Well, as
Senior
far,
and
as far
the-
as the senior games, that's just one of many duties one of our staff people in the senior center does. So there wouldn't be any time there. They're just doing that as part of their job.
and if I may, I don't want to under or overstate the role of our staff as the City Parks and Recreation Department staff, or the role of the staff at the senior center. In another hat, I'm on the board for North Carolina Senior Games. So statewide, I'm on their board. And so I have some experience working in different communities and how that program works, as well as I'm very aware of how it works here in Goldsboro and in Wayne County. It's not a 50-50 split between any, it's not 50% city time or 50% county time that goes into producing the North Carolina Senior Games, even at the local level here as well. So there'd be a heck of a mess of spaghetti to unintertwine, although it's very doable if y'all would like us to bring those numbers back to you and show you who serves what role and how Senior Games is provided to our citizens countywide.
And I just couldn't help but think that would be helpful before we make a decision about whether we would do it or not do it, or whether it could
Yes,
not be
sir.
blended together or not. I mean,
Mr.
I'm
Chairman.
sorry, I'll stop in a minute. I worked for the public school system for 32 years, and I saw too many things blended together that still turned out to be successful to suggest that it's impossible to do it. That's
Yes,
the whole
sir.
thing I'm saying.
Mr. Daugherty.
I withdraw my motion and make the motion that this matter be tabled and ask George to go ahead and work with Scott in some way to bring back a recommendation.
Mr. Daugherty has withdrawn his original motion, and he has made a new motion that we table this until the county manager and the city manager can come back with a little more information. Do I have any other discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Mayor?
do we need to put something on this motion, or are we okay? I think we still need to do it during our budget year. And what I'm asking is that will the existing coordinator maintain the coordinator position
Yes, sir.
until we do our budget?
No, sir, which is the reason that it was brought to our council with urgency by myself and the members of North Carolina Special Olympics, because as of December 9th, the program more or less has ceased to exist. A handful of volunteers are cobbling together a way for basketball, the first spring event, to take place. But as y'all are well aware, once you lose momentum of a program, any program, whether it's Special Olympics or otherwise, there is some startup time to get things going on. And that's why we brought it to our council and are again before y'all as a board today as well, because there is some urgency in this. But at the same time, bringing it back in the budget cycle, you know, if we knew that we had some potential support going forward, you know, we'd figure out a way to assist that group and cobble it together to hold things together as best we could to get us through till July, September, that type of time frame.
I think one of my concerns is, according to my sheet, you were notified on the 10th of January.
Right. Whatever the date on Scott's
And it
email
was-
is,
and it
yeah,
was-
it's
And
10th.
it was late in the afternoon, something like
Right.
almost 6 o'clock. So
That's
you can
right.
count off the 10th. We've only known about this something like 8 days.
Right.
And really, I didn't know it until I got my packet
Mhm.
for this meeting.
Right.
I actually got it Saturday because, you know, we were out of town on the county commissioners meeting. And I just think we need to give it a little more thought and certainly not against the Special
Yes, sir.
Olympics by no means. Now, I want to make that perfectly clear, but I just, the lead time on, it's just, is what I have an issue with.
Yeah.
Is
One
let's see a
thing
few
also,
more
I
facts.
just remind you that at your goal-setting session on the 8th, one of the goals you set was to have a policy regarding the funding of nonprofits.
Yeah.
And I believe you said at that point, too, you wanted a review of everything we were already funding.
Yep.
And we've sent you out a list recently of what all we do fund. The other thing I did, and I share the concern, and as part of that policy, I would highly recommend that you have everybody go through the normal budget process. Because if you don't, what's going to happen is throughout the year, you're going to have nonprofits approach you about trying to help them when their funding comes up short. And as the economy continues in the course it is, you're probably going to have more and more requests like this. That's no reflection on Special Olympics or anybody else. It's just reality. We have over 100 charitable organizations in this county. All of them do good work. I think we'd all agree that they provide a great benefit to the community. The real issue comes down to how many of them should be funded out of taxpayers' funds. And if everybody who comes up short during the year comes back to you and says, we need some taxpayer money to fund things we used to do, I'm concerned that you're going to have, this would just be the first of many that you'd be confronted with. So I would strongly suggest that part of the policy be that they have to do it in the course of the normal budget cycle, which, as y'all know, we've started. Roughly 4 months from now, you'll have a budget before you in late May, as will the city council.
Correct.
At that point. So I would suggest that. The other thing is that I think their mission needs to be something that has a direct connection with services provided by Wayne County. That's why I'm okay with looking at it as far as the senior games, because we already do that and we run the senior center. But we do not run a Parks and Recreation Department. That's not to say counties can't, but this county has not chosen to do that, and so we're not in that business. The other thing I would point out is you need to have a direct connection with our core mission. One final thing I want to stress to you is that, and y'all know this from the budget retreat, we talked about we're facing additional debt service costs for the 2 new middle schools of about $1.1 million over and above what's in our current budget. So starting July 1, you'll have to add that to your budget. We have the additional cost to operate the Advanced Manufacturing Center. The estimate from Wayne Community College on that is $270,000 more than you fund them right now. So that will have to be added to the budget. You also have the new jail coming online, and you have the operating costs for that. And then you have the added debt service for the Eastern Region loans, and Pam, I think that's around 600,000. If you add that together, that's almost $2 million of new funding that we will face starting July 1 in that fiscal year that we don't face this year. And I just want to remind you of that, because when we talk about comparing the needs of the things you're legally obligated to provide, we start out $2 million in the hole on next year's budget. So there is no extra money. And, you know, you might be able to find some money in this year's budget, but it's going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, in next year's budget when we face roughly a $2 million increase in expenditures over what we currently have. So this isn't all about just a policy, but whether the practical matter of can you financially afford it.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Mayor.
And
Oh, okay.
You
Bill,
go ahead.
I was just going to, as of what you just said, Mr. Wood, I was going to make an amendment to Commissioner Daughter's motion that the study that you're going to do, that it be included with all the other nonprofits and look at it at our normal budget cycle.
Mhm.
That's the amendment.
Mr. Payton.
In view of what we've said, and I asked the question this morning, and we found out just a minute ago, that you can make local donations to the Wayne County Special Olympics. Who does that need to go to? Because I went on the website, and all I could see was a website that you gave, and I'm sure it went to a big pile of money, and maybe somebody ever got out there. But if there's a, immediate need, maybe the citizens could help step up and pay for this. So who does the donation go to? Who do I write my check to here just for Wayne County?
Since there is no coordinator right now, I'm overseeing the Wayne County position, so the checks can come in directly to me. And then as obviously Special Olympics North Carolina, Wayne County, and then they go directly into the Wayne County Board account.
Okay, did you get that?
And I have a card that I
Yeah.
can,
If you would leave that with us, because,
certainly.
I certainly support the Special Olympics because it's a great cause. But we've been kind of in the middle of our budget year too. And so I'll be glad to write a check.
Okay. Mr. Dodd.
Let me wrap up. I'm really upset that this is kind of brought to and put at our feet unexpectedly, when in fact, in my estimation, it was some bad planning in the past of making sure there was a successor to the volunteer. Now that's it. I mean, somebody needs to say that, because I think Special Olympics here locally was aware of this for 5 years or more. And all of a sudden, in mid-budget, here it is kind of laid out here, making us, or me, this commission, I speak for me, making me look like someone that does not have the heart enough to allocate dollars from the taxpayers to fund a position that is needed. Now, to me, I look at it that your organization ought to step up and do some additional fundraising to raise the necessary funds in order to fund a volunteer, if that volunteer has to be funded. But in your organization, you should handle that, not coming to boards and commissions and saying, hey, how about funding a position? There's another way to handle this that I think would have been much, much better. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I have a motion on the floor and an amendment.
You have to reread that, because I will make sure that we just.
We'll need to act on the amendment before we act on the motion. Mr. Doherty.
Can I remove my motion, and I'll go with your amendment as the motion, if you will state that motion?
I don't know if I can or not.
Well, I'd like to ask this.
Mr. Kumar.
What was Mr. Daugherty's original, the one that you're talking about pulling back?
He made a motion that we table it until Mr. Wood and Scott could review it and bring us back some information.
I want to leave that in place, Joe. I don't have no problem adding something to it, but I want to leave that in place because it gives us an opportunity to look closely at everything. And I don't disagree with you, Mr. Mayo, but I don't want to remove Mr. Daugherty's motion because it gives us an opportunity to table it and look real close.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Mayor.
that's basically what we're doing with my amendment, is that we're gonna study all nonprofits during our budget cycle. What I'm saying is include the Special Olympics into this list. You can do Special Olympics first if you like. That's your prerogative, Mr. Wood. But my motion is that we study the Special Olympics along with our other nonprofits, and that we look at it at our budget year, not now, but before June 31st, and June 31st when our new
Yeah,
budget
and
comes in.
I agree with that completely, because I'll incorporate my recommendations to you within the budget after we review it compared to everything else we've got.
Yeah.
And again, we've got a lot of new things we've got to cover.
And on top of that, Mr. Camardi, we can also discuss this as our county manager comes up with points that we need to know. You know, we can do that in a work session or a closed session, whatever we'd like.
One thing I'd also like to do before you get the budget is to come back to you with a formal policy recommendation on how to fund nonprofits.
Okay.
Okay, let's vote on the amendment first.
I'll make sure that you decided to release your motion.
If you vote on this, mine's mute, so go ahead.
Well, we still got, Mr. Mayor's is just an amendment.
That's correct.
And then we still have to vote on yours, correct?
Well, no, if the amendment goes
The
through.
amendment,
Okay, all right.
It goes to the motion. Yeah,
Right.
mine's moved up to a motion, I guess.
All right, we have a motion on the floor, an amendment from Mr. Mayo. Any other discussion? No other discussion, all in favor show sign of right hand. Motion carries unanimous.
Now you vote on the motion as amended.
All right. Now I have a motion on the floor that has been amended. Any other discussion?
We're talking about the original motion.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
but as amended, which states that basically we're going to take this up
At the budget.
at the budget time.
Okay.
All right, I have a motion on the floor. No other discussion. All in favor show sign of right hand.
Yeah, we're good there.
Motion carries unanimous.
I don't think he made it.
He didn't make one.
That went away when the first motion.
Scott, thank you for stepping up to the plate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Hey, thank y'all for giving us an audience today.
And we're really not saying no, but we just
I
need to
understand
know a little,
completely.
just need to know a little bit more.
And please leave us your card.
And Mr. Chairman,
I'll leave my car.
Mr. Mayor.
I haven't said this, but I do want to make it clear that I am certainly for Special Olympics. It's very valuable to the citizens, not only in Wayne County, but outside of our county. So we're just looking at it with good common sense at this point, and we'll see how it shakes out. Thank you.
One last comment. Please give your contact information, if you'll get that to the county, so that,
Yeah.
and let's try to raise some additional dollars here as a result of this, because I think dollars will solve this.
Yeah.
But let's get it from the private sector. Let's do some more fundraising.
And what Mr. Doherty just said is correct, and, the private sector, we're asking now, we will have the information. I was not aware that if you gave locally, it stayed locally. I figured it went into the state pot, and then it was dealt out to all 100 counties. But I think this will help the public understand that if you give locally and earmark it for the local, that it will benefit our special need children and adults here in the county.
I would like to add that I'm not against, I'm not absolutely against public funding for part of this. I just want to make sure that, number one, all the possible entities are looked at so that it will not unfairly impact anything else we already have going, and still look at the potential for, and I hear it said, you know, it's just a part, everybody got their own portion of jobs. But if you're doing some activities that have a relationship, you know, it's called multitasking. That's all I want to call it. But I agree with everything Mr. Wood said about the obligations we have. And the reason that he was shown to be the masterful manager this morning that we talked about I know that he can help figure a way to make all this happen and it comes out like it needs to. Thank you.
And again, thank y'all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Okay, Mr. Wood, next item.
The next item is a presentation of the E911 Communications Center Needs Assessment. It's been done by Mission Critical Partners, and they're here today to present that plan to you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. My name is Philip Penny. I'm here today representing Mission Critical Partners. I'm here with Louisa Lake, who did a lot of the heavy lifting in the report. First, I just want to say I want to thank the commission for giving us an opportunity to instill the confidence in us that we could come and present this report and present to you what our findings are. We certainly want to thank Brian Taylor and the members of his staff. There was a lot of information that had to be gathered. We actually started this report back in June of last year. So there's a lot of information that went in this report. The goal of the report was to analyze the current staffing and to review not only the staffing, but how staffing could affect the facility and whether or not, if the decision is made to increase the staffing, whether or not there's additional room within the operations room that they have now. When we looked at the staffing, we looked at organizational structure. We included the staffing and responsibilities at all levels within the 911 center. We looked at the shared responsibility that the fire marshal has as serving as not only the fire marshal but also the 911 director. We looked at how next generation could affect the operations of your 911 center. When I talk about next generation, what does that mean for your current operation? What does that mean? How are you going to handle text messages? How are you going to handle crash notifications from vehicles out on 70 when there's an accident and the information is relayed to somewhere to give them the information? And the dispatch protocols. I'm sure that looking at this report, you've seen that there's an emergency medical dispatch protocol, there's fire protocol, as well as police protocol. And Louisa will talk a little bit more about that. We looked at the current facilities that included the space that you're currently in now. We looked at the furniture, the capacity, and the size of furniture and how they may fit into the existing space that you have now. If we do increase that, you will have to decide whether there's an additional space there, but we've looked at some options as far as facility space within the facility they're in now by moving some other people to another floor and relocating the 911 center now. We also looked at the space within the EOC and whether or not that really gave you enough space to perform an emergency operations center event when we have our hurricanes come in and our ice storms and so forth. There are some options when we look at this time of year when you're looking at taking on a project like this. There are some options as far as funding. There's funding that can be found within the North Carolina 911 Board for grant opportunities. There's certain things that have to meet the criteria, and in this situation, what you're looking for certainly meets the criteria for that. So that's an option, and I'm sure that's something that you can look at and talk about later. So hopefully you've had time to look a little bit over the report. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Lake, let her go over the actual assessment and the numbers that I'm sure you're going to be interested in.
Good afternoon. I see that most of you already have your report, and I understand you received that after the budget retreat, so hopefully you may have had a chance to look at it already. We do understand that there are going to be budget implications with some of our recommendations, and that they do require long-term planning. It's not something that we expect you to be able to just jump into and say you're going to go out and hire 6 more people, immediately. So that's just something to consider moving forward. And some of the recommendations in the report may require institutional changes from some of the responder agencies. And again, these aren't taken lightly. We know they can't be changed in a vacuum by the 911 center staff. Something that's going to require some work and coordination with the responder agencies in order to be successful. The needs assessment, as you can see, and I see you just got the presentation. I included some notes in the event that you may have gotten them early. Currently, the center has 24 full-time operational personnel, and by this we mean supervisors and telecommunicators. We're not talking about the management staff and those in the outer offices. And they currently work in 4 shifts. The other part of the needs assessment was to look at the facility that they're currently in, and Mr. Penny already spoke about that briefly. When we looked at the operational configuration, currently there are 5 dispatch positions that they staff 24/7. And that's 3 law enforcement positions, 1 fire position, and 1 EMS position. And I'm making the assumption that most of you are familiar with how the 911 center may operate. Goldsboro Police, even though it's 1 position, requires 2 staff members. They sit at different console positions because of the amount of traffic that's on the radio and the current operational configuration. So while that's considered 1 position, it's still taking 2 staff members. Another law enforcement position is the sheriff's office, and they also handle Fremont, Pikeville, and the Walnut Creek Police Departments. That position is a standalone. And the 3rd law enforcement position is dedicated to Mount Olive Police Department only. And this raises a concern because, again, it's a very small area, 2.5 square miles, for reasons that you all may be aware of, and if necessary, I'm sure Mr. Taylor can expound upon. They are on their own dispatch channel, which is generally monitored by their supervisor. The supervisor also helps monitor the sheriff's department, law enforcement talk group, to again assist with radio traffic when they get busy. Fire and EMS are standalone.
Mr. Chairman, as we're going through here, if we have
Yes.
questions, can we,
Absolutely.
because I'm,
Make sure you talk into the
Yes.
because I'm gonna forget this by the
Okay.
time you get through with it.
Sure, absolutely.
Why would we have 1 position established just for Mount Olive?
That's what Taylor asked.
I'm gonna let Mr. Taylor answer that one.
I'll try to answer that for you. When the 911 center, when we originally moved to the building we're in today, the local municipalities were part of the sheriff's department frequency, if you will. They were dispatched on those frequency. When we moved to the current radio system, it was decided back then to split that duty up to ease some of the workload off that sheriff dispatcher because of increased call volume within the county and the sheriff's department, increased traffic stops, and everything else the sheriff was doing at the time. We were trying to free up a little work and even out the workload within the center, and the supervisor actually listens to the Mount Olive side. The supervisor does a number of different things in there other than just answering the phones and dispatch. They have to do some quality assurance stuff and other stuff dealing with the actual personnel. Then, and Mr. Gurley, you might have to help me here, maybe about a year ago, it was decided then to move all the municipalities, with the exception of Mount Olive, back to the sheriff dispatch channel at the request of the sheriff.
And
those-
why
and
was
those
Mount
local
Olive
municipalities.
excluded from that decision?
Traffic volume, basically.
Just, they,
When you bring
they really wouldn't.
the smaller municipalities over to the sheriff's frequency, it was just a small amount of traffic volume, but Mount Olive generates enough traffic volume, we felt it's probably better to leave it separated as was Goldsboro as well. If I recall
Okay.
And they hadn't requested to go to the sheriff dispatch channel as the other departments had.
But could they?
They could, absolutely.
Would that cost them any dollars?
No,
No.
no.
Mr. Mayor,
My question is that this decision had to be made according to some standard. Are we in Wayne County with 123,000 and some change population, are we that much of, how do we stand as far as other counties that have a similar population? In other words, there's got to be a reason why Mount Olive is not included. And what would other counties do that are about the same size as ours? Does anybody know?
It is unusual to find a department of this size that has 1 or 2 officers on duty at one time to be on their own frequency. This is something that the center has tried to address. There are, I guess the nice way to say is there may be some political reasons involved too.
Well, if they are, we need to know what they are.
political reasons.
When all the municipalities were together, outside of the sheriff on the municipal dispatch channel, a lot of them requested, and the sheriff requested, they go back. In our professional opinion, Mount Olive should have gone back as well. But
Well,
that-
here's the problem
but
I
that did not
have.
happen.
From a budget standpoint, if the county is actually funding these positions, then Mount Olive should not be the one determining whether or not they are efficiently being monitored. I mean, I'm sorry. Well, I'm just saying it
And
like
that's
it.
our-
I put my foot in my mouth all the time. I got used to it. But my point is that if the county is funding those positions, you need to operate them as efficiently as you can.
Yes.
And we do not need a political determination as to whether or not that is being operated efficiently.
A question.
And
Mr. Martin.
just let me address this, if you will. When this started, and when Mount Olive was left over kind of on its own, we had a pretty, it was about a year ago there again, and it was being considered for this study. So we were gonna have that looked at anyway to help us formulate that we need to migrate to one single dispatch channel versus multiple different dispatch channels for law enforcement. Sometimes you can't never estimate exactly what's gonna happen in the 911 center, but there are some times that Mount Olive's traffic is enough to get them off of that main dispatch channel. Sometimes they do have enough call volume down there that it could interrupt that main dispatch channel for the sheriff's department. But with that being said, we could work around that. We're going to use this study as part of that to look so we can migrate.
Is this
away
study recommending that Mount Olive be moved over?
Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you. That
It does.
That answers that.
Mr. Martin.
Now, while it was either said or hinted that it was a political decision, my question is this. The persons who asked for that, or asked it to be done like that, were they looking at, I'm talking about the safety side of it. I'm not talking where somebody was satisfied with who was the boss and nothing like that. It's not what I'm getting at. I'm getting at, was it a safety factor in there?
They were concerned
Of safety.
that their radio, they may not be able to get on the radio when they wanted to.
All right. Now, I don't know, I can't speak officially because I don't understand it enough, but I can tell you that I have heard conversation that at times Mount Olive couldn't get on it, couldn't be heard, couldn't communicate. And I can't be specific about it. It's just that I got the impression that there were problems. Although it may sound political, it had to do something with maybe where Mount Olive is located, or the equipment was being used, or something. Now, living in Mount Olive, I would not want to give away the opportunity for our calls to be heard at the most efficient manner possible. And I don't care whether that's political or monetary.
No, I agree.
I'm just telling you, as a person who may need it.
I agree completely.
Okay.
I spent 20 years with the Greensboro Police Department in North Carolina here on their communication staff. And part of the operational configuration that we talk about in the report is that currently the main dispatch channels are being used to run driver's license, registrations, things of that nature that in larger centers are not handled on the primary frequency. There is a dedicated channel for that. And so when I talked a moment ago about there may be some institutional changes, currently that's how Goldsboro and the Sheriff's Office are choosing to operate, which is to run that ancillary information on the main frequency. What that does is it ties up the dispatcher, takes their focus away from the current calls and incidents to handle that traffic, which is why Goldsboro has 2 people listening to the channel, and the Sheriff's Department has the backup of Mount Olive listening to help relieve some of that workload that's being done on the primary frequency. Larger centers, it's common to give the tag of the license, to give the vehicle registration when you're stopping a car. Asking for further information, such as information on the occupants of the car, things of that nature, can be handled on a separate frequency. It does mean switching off of the main frequency, but your dispatchers are trained, they're in the same room, that it's an easy switch, and that's also one of our operational recommendations to alleviate the need for 2 people to be monitoring the same channel. It's not an efficient use of resources to have that occurring. And
I'm sorry, but
Yes.
that's what's occurring now.
that's
Is
what's
it-
occurring now,
Some of the other
correct?
things that's taking place on the main frequency
Correct.
is optional, not the primary, because you see,
Yes,
somebody like me, we're thinking that until I heard of all the other things that we use for, we're thinking that when somebody calls for help, they're not in competition with somebody wanting to know how many people in the car and what their driving license number is and all that. We think we're in competition with somebody else needing help to come and get you. Now, and as I hear your explanation of all the other traffic could be on there, and I'm not going to, but I'll just give you an example. About 6 or 8 months ago, I made a call for my sister. It was either about 4:15 a.m. or 5:15 a.m. I can't remember which hour it was. But if it was about 4:15, it was closer to 4:45 before someone got there. Now here me thinking is that help was right in Mount Olive. I thought they went out through Newton County someplace to get to my sister's house. Because I called back, where are they? And I saw the guy coming along with fire with a flashlight looking at the numbers. And so, I don't want to make a speech here, but I just want to, if we're crowding the main source up with extra things, I want the report to come out and say that we're going to dedicate to emergencies and not about.
that would, and I can assure you that's the case here, that calls for service take precedence over someone calling in a driver's license or a registration check. That's going to take precedence. If someone else is talking, they're going to have to wait. There could be other reasons for delay, such as no officers available, that slows a response down. So I can't speak to that specific incident, but there are things that are tying up the channels just based on the operational configuration. And the report does talk about that. And on page 16 of your report, we look at the incident volumes of each of the agencies. And you can see that Mount Olive Police has 7,000 incidents a year. Whereas the sheriff's frequency is handling about 35,000 a year, and Goldsboro Police is handling 54,000 a year. So even if Mount Olive were to move to the sheriff's frequency, they are still not generating as much traffic as is being handled on the Goldsboro Police. Now that's assuming that they are all on the same talk group. It is definitely a safety issue to have a dispatcher listening to two or three different talk groups, because then they're split attention. So when you just base it just on what the incidents are, a dispatcher and their center should not have any difficulty transitioning to that extra workload. But again, it is an operational change that we are recommending.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Do you have one dedicated person for Goldsboro Police, or two?
It's two.
You have two dedicated.
The,
And then one additional for all of the rest, or actually two more?
We have two for Goldsboro PD, one for the sheriff's department, which includes Pikeville, Fremont, and Walnut Creek. And then the supervisor, which backs up the sheriff dispatcher and also does the Mount Olive.
Okay.
And then, of course, the fire and EMS.
Okay,
and what,
thank you.
what compounds their operational configuration here is currently with their staff, they have 6 people assigned to a squad, and that's a supervisor and 5 telecommunicators, well, an assistant and 4 telecommunicators. These are all dispatch positions. So you have 5 people listening to the radio. These people who are listening to the radio are also the ones that are answering all the calls coming into the center. So you could have someone on EMS answering the phone call, and it's a fire call. They're staying on that call, getting all the information while fire's dispatching it. During the busy time of the day, which the busiest 12 hours are from between 10 a.m. and 10 p.m., it is possible that every single dispatcher is taking a phone call. Well, if you're taking a phone call, you then can't be immediately at the same time dispatching your call for service. So in a center as this size, it's unusual that there is not one person dedicated to call take, to answering 911 calls that come in. As you will see when you review the report, unfortunately, the county has a very high abandoned call rate. It's higher than the national average. It's anywhere between, on your handout that you were given, on page 4 in the notes, that's the attrition rate, and the other is, it's on the next page. Your abandoned call rate averages about 17%. And so that means 17 calls of 100 coming in, the person is either hanging up before it gets answered or realize they've misdialed and they hang up.
I want to ask a question.
Yes, sir.
Is there any way for you to tell whether or not this became that magnitude of a problem prior to the telephone company having us to have put 919 in before making our call? You see, because I can tell you that this is a bad analogy, but old golfers, sometimes they go to putt and they like that. Well, the problem is between these new cell phones and you hitting it, and I've done it myself, hit 911 when you actually want to do 919. Now, I've learned to stay on until I've made a mistake. But it's still tying it up.
It does.
So I'm wondering if, and I know we can't go back and tell the telephone company what to do, but I'm just looking at the reasons why these increases come in and there's no fault that we can change anyway. It adds to the problem. That added to the problem. The 919 thing added to the problem. You must not do 911.
A lot of the abandoned call rates have to do with misdials, does account for a lot, but it's difficult to go back unless your center actually tracks, we made contact with this person, it was a mistake, and uses that. Most centers do not do that. So some are obviously misdials. Others are the person gets impatient when their call is not answered in a timely manner. And what happens when the center is understaffed, if you've looked at the report at all or glanced through it, the center is understaffed. And the operational configuration compounds that as well because you've got split duties. So if I happen to be working Goldsboro Police and answer a call for a robbery in progress, technically that call that I've just answered is also my responsibility to dispatch. So my responsibilities are split, and it creates a liability issue that puts your dispatchers in an untenable position. Do I handle the robbery on the phone? If an officer is all of a sudden screaming for assistance, who gets my attention first? Also, if somebody's calling in and I'm having, if you did EMD, to give cardiac CPR instructions, and an officer's got an emergency, where's my attention go? Which deserves higher? So it's really a position that you don't want to put your staff in. But again, because of the operational configuration, that's currently what's happening. And we have recommended in here, obviously, some changes to the operational configuration to put dedicated staff on phones, and to change how the operations are set up. And as you can see from the call volume on that same page, fire's call volume is fairly low overall, as is EMS. And in centers such as Wayne County, if you have a dedicated call taker, they're the primary ones to answer the phone, which could be then followed by the person assigned to fire and then the person assigned to EMS, so that there is a progression as to who answers the phone. And currently the center tries to do that. They try to start off with the positions that are lowest, but when you only have 5 people on duty and all of them are assigned to radio, at times everybody is going to have to answer the phones.
What time frame is these numbers from? Is that last fiscal year, calendar year?
That's for 2013, because at the time we collected the data, I believe, do we have incident volume yet or just call volume? For 2014? So the incident volume is probably going to probably remain about the same, if not increase.
Well, I was thinking it would probably increase. And also just clarify, you all talking about missed dials and hang-ups.
Yes, sir.
Every one of those calls generates another call.
Yes, it does.
Because you have to follow up on it, because you don't know
Correct.
whether they dialed it and not able to speak. Every one of those calls generates another call.
Yes, because the staff calls them back.
Right.
And sometimes if I've called them back and it's busy, it's because they're already calling back in. So then you can't reach them. You're tied up trying to make contact. And protocol is you send someone to try to make contact if it's a landline, or try to locate the wireless caller. So you're also tying up resources.
So if I'm reading this correctly, the 911 calls is 154,000.
Are you
What
on?
is a 7-10-digit calls?
That's the non-emergency administrative lines that come into the center.
So you mean to tell me 131,000 calls come in annually that are non-emergency? How do you classify non-emergency? My water doesn't work?
Yes, that could be that. Some older residents before 911 was instituted still have the 7-digit number to call for law enforcement. A lot of times it's calling to find out about city services or county services. They just don't know what number to call.
All right, the next one was outbound calls. What is that?
Those are the calls that the center is having to remake, either to contact maybe a towing company for an officer, or if an officer requests contact be made with a resident, calling 911 calls back. Those are all calls that are tracked from the center.
It was my understanding that when you all did this analysis, that you all also would be looking at these non-emergency administrative calls and make some recommendations how we can reduce call volume. In other words, you can add positions, but you also could possibly reduce call volume. If you reduce call volume, you would not necessarily need the extra positions. And when I read through this, I didn't see where you all had identified any recommendations to reduce non-emergency administrative
Yeah, we
call
did
volume.
not delve into what types of non-emergency calls come into the center. A lot of them are calls that end up getting dispatched for law enforcement, whether it's a cold case burglary call that they came home, their house had been broken into, they call the non-emergency line, whether it's, a dog case, referrals such as that. A lot of the calls that do come in do necessitate field responders going out. It's near impossible to get rid of all your administrative calls. It just doesn't happen. 911 is staffed 24/7. Most county agencies are not, so they get the calls going into their center.
If agencies are recommending that people call the 911 center after hours to report any problems, then undoubtedly your call volume is going to go up. And that's my concern. My concern is, are we, on the county level, funding positions for after-hours administrative calls? Are we doing that? Can we answer that?
Well, I think the answer is you are.
Yeah.
Well, if we are,
The
I think
issue
we,
is- Yeah, the issue is, we don't have a breakdown on that, but I do think as part of this overall reconfiguration here, that's certainly something we should look at, because I know for a fact, for instance, Milford has taken all of his emergency calls off and has given a phone number out and that our departments are to use to call him or Kendall.
well, has the
separately.
city done that?
But that's my point is I think we're going to have to review all of this, and then we're going to have to make some tough decisions. Just like you're going to have to make a tough decision about what to do on Mount Olive, I think you're going to have to make some tough decisions about whether or not we're going to fund administrative call taking after hours.
Well-
Because that could take out quite a few of these calls.
There are
Now,
two-
as you said, we can't put a number on that yet.
And it's, if anything, it may reduce it by a person.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, since 911 centers are staffed 24/7, I have not seen a 911 center yet be able to cut their administrative calls down that much by referring it back to the agencies themselves. Because then what happens is the agencies are having to fund a position 24/7. And now, there are some agencies that do charge for that service after hours, but again, that would be something that you'd have to look into if you chose to do that. But cutting this number drastically is not likely to occur.
Well, here's a couple of concerns. I'm just full of concerns today.
That's all right.
First concern is, you're telling me you have no way of knowing what the number is in regards to administrative calls.
As into how many are coming from other agencies?
Right.
That's correct.
Why?
That's not something that is
Well, I
tracked.
think our staff needs to be in some way recording that so we can get some number on it. I mean, this thing is just going to continue to grow is what I'm saying. If you add positions, well then, my goodness, next thing you know, the sanitary districts will have after-hours administrative calls coming into it. It'll just, you have to realize what the problem is, number one. Number two, you're telling me that there's no way that we know how many misdials we're getting in our 911 center?
Most centers can't tell you that unless they are actually
Well,
physically tracking the information.
Well, we need to track it then.
Well, I will tell you
Because-
that because you're understaffed and your staff have split responsibilities.
I don't think it would take that much in order to put a tick mark there if in fact it's a misdial. But that's number one. If we can't track it and you don't have a quantity number, how can we go to the telephone, to the Utilities Commission and ask them to change our 919 to a 222 or something else? You have to have some way of tracking it so we've got some data to give them to justify having this change take place. Now, don't want to misstep here, but my information from a person that actually works in that center is telling me that the call volume is approximately 30% of misdials. Is that possible? 30% of the calls coming in are misdials.
I'm not sure who you're getting your information from, but I would dare go on record and say that is absolutely untrue.
Well, but we need to track it, is what I'm saying. We need to have some way that we can quantitatively know approximately what that number is.
And the only way we can truly track that is a manual tracking.
Sure.
And there are some times in the 911 center that's just going to just about be impossible to do.
I understand that.
We have done some manually tracking of some things, and we get a rough figure, but it's nowhere near exact.
Well, if we're setting out, you're saying from this information, we're going to try to set some policies and try to contain calls and make some recommendations. We need some more data, is what I'm saying. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I got one question before you get off of that.
Yes, sir.
Table one, the highlighted green abandoned calls is 17.57%.
Yes, sir.
Now, can you not break that down between wireline and wireless?
On your system, I don't believe we can. Is that correct?
See, I'm just trying to quantify that number. Is that quantify that number by, is there our local people dialing within our region 919 and accidentally, or is it somebody else?
The way the phone is set up on your cell phone, if you look, 919, unless they're hitting the one twice by accident on their cell phone, it's possible, but some MIS systems are set up that you can easily differentiate between wireline and wireless, but I don't believe that we were able to separate that information here.
Yeah, and just to go a little bit further on that, you know, we have discussed in the past, I don't want to say issue, but a problem between what AT&T, the MIS side of the 911 center that we can look at versus the state's ECATS. The ECATS is what the state goes by, and we cannot do that, I know, by ECATS, I don't believe, on the abandoned rate. I'm not even sure on the MIS if we can look at the abandoned rate and tell where it's coming from other than it's just an abandoned call. As that call comes into that switch, it sees it, and if a call's drop, it just sees it that it's been abandoned before it was answered. I'm not sure that we can really tell if it's, I haven't really looked at that. I don't remember seeing that as an option to be able to look at that closely.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Mayor.
I just wanted to ask Brian, on the follow-up with Commissioner Daughter, are we limited, and I apologize, I need to go and see the 911 center, and my question is this. I've been in there, but I haven't seen it in operation. Are we straddled or hampered in any way by statutes or anything from the state that prohibits us from having, in this day of technology, the ability to screen a call and say whether it's, like Mr. Daughter is talking about, is technology prohibiting us from doing that? Do we need to buy something in order to do that? Because it's beyond me that technology wouldn't allow us to do that.
Oh, you mean to see what type of call is coming in?
Yeah, so
Before-
rather
before
than,
it's
Rules
answered?
to answer it and find out what they want.
well, here's the key. Whenever you say, Mr. Daugherty, that if that's what we're actually doing, when somebody calls in, then if it's not a call that we want to take, you put a dot on a piece of paper beside of somebody's name, that's antiquated to me. The technology that's out there, isn't there something that we can do that
We
without?
can keep up with the total number of calls coming in and going out, but we can't tell you that we're getting 500 calls a year from the city public works department. We can't tell you that it's coming from that number.
Now, what we could do is possibly take 1 month
Yeah, I mean,
And-
we'd have to look at it.
and do a survey there and then extrapolate from that, which I think would give us a pretty good
Yeah,
ballpark.
and generally that's what we do when we
So
look at.
I think we can do that, and then once we have that data, we can start looking at, do we need to change some of our policies? Because Milford has already cut back on our public works stuff. And so to me, if other agencies are giving out our 911 number for, water or sewer problems, things after hours, drainage problems, whatever, we can put a stop to that, because we can make it clear to the agency, we're no longer going to answer those. We'll answer them, but our answer is going to be, you need to call the Public Works Department, and 919 does not handle those calls anymore. And then they'll have to eventually change their policy to where they give them a 7 or 10-digit number for after hours, and they handle those calls themselves. Either that, or as the lady was saying, is you charge them for it. Because if we're having to add, we didn't take on to be an administrative call taker. We signed up to be a 911 center, and that's supposed to be countywide. We didn't sign up to be the Public Works after hours answering service, or, how do you get a ticket for a Parks and Recreation event or something. If you're gonna do that, if you're gonna tie up our people, then we need to charge for that, or we need to go one step further and say, we're just gonna cut it off. we're not gonna give them the information. We're just gonna cut them off and say, you need to call the city of Pikeville, town of Pikeville, city of Goldsboro, whomever, and handle that. And that way, you'll eventually cut down what we can cut down.
Yeah.
But I don't disagree with her. I don't know that it's gonna be equal to one person, but it will provide some flexibility there that we don't have now.
George, just for the knowledge, the sanitary districts have their own numbers.
Yeah,
The problem is the general public does not have a clue who to call. They may be on XYZ sanitary district. And that sanitary district has got a number, their own number to call.
And they don't
But the
know.
general public don't have a clue.
Right.
I mean, I'm gonna bet 90% of the people, all they're concerned is that their water is off.
Right.
And they're gonna call our number
right.
just from, well, I don't want to call them ignorant, but they just don't know any different.
Well, and I think we can do some publication of that and those types of things, but after that, I mean, it would, you know, if you want to cut it, you're gonna have to take a tough stance on it and say, we can't keep being the after-hours call center.
Well, we finally got around to what I want to talk about, and that is abuse. And we talked about, basically, we've been abusing the system. The system was not designed to handle after-hours water calls. So whether or not it's departments or citizens, there's a lot of abuse here. I hear of calls coming in that they want somebody to come out and change their TV station. I've heard of, well, I've had a knot on my leg for the last 3 years. There's a lot of abuse that's there, and we need to do some education and/or implement some policies to hold down on the abuse, whether that's charging that agency for those call volumes, or some penalties if you're going to abuse the 911 system.
And I'm sure you all have heard, some bigger cities have 311 centers that they implement to be that number for citizens to call when they need just general information. Some other counties and city agencies have elected to have their 911 center, because they are staffed 24/7, provide that service to the citizens, but they also staff appropriately for it. So there is not one model that fits all. It's whatever Wayne County chooses to be in the best interest of its citizens.
Is the 311 recommendation in here?
No, because again, we didn't look at all the different types of administrative calls that were coming in.
Evidently, my expectations were different than what they are, but, you know, I was hoping that you all would give us some recommendations of how we can contain our cost, not necessarily fund positions.
Right.
I mean, not recommend
Well,
positions.
Joe,
No.
one thing they are talking about is if you can drop the percentage of abandoned calls, then we don't have to call back, and that cuts down on these outgoing
Dramatically.
calls.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think when you get the staffing where they're recommending, that will drop. And then if you do some work on these administrative calls, I think that'll drop. And then you can do the thing with Mount Olive that they're talking about, and that will free up some time.
And even some public education, if you have any local radio stations or good relationships with any of the media, public education that if you dial 911 by mistake, don't hang up, stay on the line. Just let us know it was a mistake. It's not a problem. It saves responder time and personnel time.
Sure, thank you.
So looking at this,
The
Did you have
presentation, this presentation wasn't going quite like you expected it was. Go ahead.
hey, I'm prepared. I can sit down if you like. When we look at everything, overall, right now, there are about 6 people short. And while 6 is a need, it's not saying, as I told you earlier, that you have to go out and hire 6 right away. We realize that takes long-term planning in your budget cycles. That is the ultimate goal where I think the center would like to be, and where they could operate efficiently and begin to prepare for text to 911 implementations, as well as EMD. And part of this 30 recommendation is also making the operational configuration to reduce some of this duplication of services with 2 different people on one radio. NCIC, which is the criminal warrants and checks and hits, and after this, I hate to bring this up, but we will. The center, a lot of times, is also doing hit confirmations and confirming warrants and wanted persons for officers that stop somebody or for other states. That responsibility falls back on 911 center staff. And that's a very lengthy process that, if I happen to be the dispatcher, could tie me up for 15 to 20 minutes.
Is that normal in normal 911s that they do that service?
Some do. Larger agencies, larger police departments that operate a 24/7 records division, a lot of times keep that in-house. Smaller agencies do pass it off to their communications because, again, the standards and the federal requirements for responding to those are within 10 minutes and an hour. So to meet that, a lot of agencies do put it back on their 911 center. That's part of the reason we recommended that NCIC and DCI requests, that's the driver's license, registration, hit confirmations, be moved off the primary frequency. Because there are such strict guidelines that if I'm a dispatcher and I'm tied up on a homicide call, for example, or a robbery call, and I also get a hit confirmation at the same time, I have to make sure everything gets done, and there are a lot of legal requirements that have to be met for that.
Brian, question for you. Does any of our law enforcement vehicles now, county or city, have the capability of doing some of this on their laptops or computers in the car?
There are some of the law enforcement agencies, Goldsboro PD, the Sheriff's Department does, Mount PD does, and I'm not sure on.
But not for hit confirmations.
Not for hit confirmations.
Okay.
They can run your basic information, your license checks, they can run warrant checks to see if there's any warrants there. But if they get a hit on their MTD, then they all call back in to verify that that hit is there. Because if there's a hit there, then there's another lengthy process that they have to go through, that our folks would have to go through to verify that hit, to verify, that just say, Robeson County has this warrant for this person and it's still active, and there's a lot of paperwork that goes along with that.
Well, I'm leading up to something though. Is there any agencies in the county that has the capability of doing part of it in their vehicle, and they're not? They're still relying on the 911 center?
There are some of that, there's some of that going on, yes.
Back to my thing.
That's what I'm saying, you gotta look at the
Thomas problem.
And part of it comes down to, it could be maintenance if their computer terminals aren't working correctly in the car, things of that, because from personal experience, that has happened. But again, that's an institutional change. Officers have to begin to take on some of that responsibility themselves. However, I would say it also becomes an officer safety issue at times. If a law enforcement officer is out with 3 or 4 people, you don't want to take your attention off 3 or 4 people to type it in, and take your attention away from that.
May I ask, this is a jargon question. Hit means what?
That means that if I've put in your driver's license and you have a warrant for your arrest, it will come back that you're a wanted person, or a car stolen, or a boat,
That's a hit.
And
guns.
there's so much more technology today and information out there. I mean, used to, basically, you could call in and run a number if there was anything in North Carolina outstanding. But now it's nationwide. I mean, if there's anything out there anywhere, I mean, it's available. And
Correct, you could get something for someone in California. The other recommendation that we have is currently there are no what we call scripted protocols in use within the center. And I'm particularly referring to emergency medical dispatch. Right now, if I'm with Phil and he's having a heart attack and I call into the 911 center and say, please give me CPR instructions, the current response is, we can't provide that service because they don't have emergency medical dispatch training. They don't have the protocols in use. So I can get you an ambulance, but I cannot provide any care that may be life-saving to you.
Why don't we have that?
There you go, put him on the spot.
It is a,
The real answer is money?
Well, everything is stripped back to money. Sorry, Mr. Dauber. But personnel, I mean, number one, we're gonna have to have more personnel to provide that to the public. And then, you know, as far as the protocols and what it would cost us, to provide that service, you know, because now I'm talking about strictly exactly how things would be given out and that kind of thing. The cost of that is minimal compared, you know, to the service that you'll be providing. So the biggest thing is being able to handle the additional call volume, because if someone calls in and I have to give instructions on CPR, I have to stay on that call the entire time. Now, we do some of that now, and we've had just recently, Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong, in the last month and a half or so, we had one of our dispatchers to stay on the phone. And it wasn't anything dealing with medical, it was on the law enforcement side where someone had broke into the home and they barricaded themselves in their home, so he stayed on the phone with that individual for 52 minutes. So for 52 minutes, that dispatcher was basically out of service, but was providing a very needed service. So that's some of the things that come along with the EMD and the EFD and the EPD, but with that, you have to have more personnel to be able to provide that service.
I'm not being comical when I ask this question, but they stayed on there 52 minutes. I'm just curious now, why did it take?
Don't ask that question.
No, I gotta ask that question.
Well, I'm sitting here thinking the same thing.
Why did it take somebody that long to get there?
Well,
Where were they
it was a
coming from?
juvenile. It was a juvenile that had called 911 because someone had broke in their home.
All right.
They
give the address?
And then when law enforcement got there, of course, they had to stay on the phone until law enforcement could get there. So they could get the proper personnel there and try to determine where this individual was without interfering with this juvenile that was scared to death for their life. So, in all, it finally came that the guy broke into the house and barricaded himself within that house.
Oh.
So it took a long time for them to get and figure out exactly what was going on.
You did say he stayed on the line. You didn't say it took him that long to get there.
Correct.
We
Right.
jumped the
No,
gun. I'm sorry.
no,
We
he
jumped
stayed
the
on the
gun.
line. No.
No, I'm sorry. Pardon me and forgive
Ed,
me.
let
I
me-
jumped the gun on me.
And let me follow up to your question. One of the reasons we haven't done it, like Brian said, it will take more manpower.
Right.
And part of the study they're going to get into later is the facility. We don't have any place to put any more people. So that's part of the issue before we can get into EMD. We got to get into the facility issue.
Well, and Mr. Wood, I was sitting here thinking, I want to ask that question. If you wanted 6 more people, where are you going to put them? Do you have a station for those, that extra person and a half per shift or whatever you're going to do?
And right now, when we talk about protocol usage and the staff of 30, currently, the average time spent on calls is less than 60 seconds here. And that's indicative of a center that's very busy. Usually we see anywhere from 1.5 to 2 minutes on 911 calls. And that's not from people and agencies that are all using scripted protocols. This center is busy because the responsibilities are split. On page 28 of the report, you will see that we have added average call times processing from Charleston County, South Carolina, that does all 3 protocols, that EMD on average for that center is 4 minutes, 49 seconds on a call. So you're talking your staff here going from 60 seconds on a call to, for EMD calls, could be an average of 5 minutes per call. That's not to say every call takes that long. Not every caller has to be kept on the line. That's just an average, and that is from a very busy center. But it just gives you only representative of the time that may be increased here. And we are not recommending that all protocols be implemented at once. EMD is a public expectation these days, that when I call in and request some medical assistance, help can be provided for me. You've seen lawsuits, I'm sure, across the country where it's not been provided. When you start talking about the staff and where do you put them, we're not asking for a staff increase of 6 on every shift. It would be about 1 per shift, and then with possibly some power shifts, meaning they come in and work different hours. So it's not 6 more people coming on. I think I was talking with Mr. Taylor and Mr. Wiggins earlier. Things could be moved around and some positions changed in the short-term interim to get another person in there at one time, because unfortunately in most centers, someone's always off or someone's out sick. That's just the nature of what happens in a 911 center. So I think a facility is going to be important, especially when we talk about some of this other, but I think getting EMD in place as soon as possible is something to be considered. The other is the 911 operations manager. And currently, Mr. Taylor's responsibilities are split as fire marshal and the 911 operations manager. Both of those are full-time responsibilities, and we're recommending that as a second priority, consideration be given to a full-time 911 operations manager. There are a lot of changes with 911 on the horizon. Next generation 911, which is going to include text messaging. It can go as far as you want it to with being able to accept pictures, video, things of that nature. So there are a lot of changes coming up, and so that's a recommendation that we have. And unfortunately, your center has had a very high attrition rate. The last year was about 26%. It's been much higher than that. Some of that's attributed to management changes several years ago, as well as the payroll system change that occurred years ago, and they're just now beginning to get out of that hole. But unfortunately, it's a vicious cycle. And please note that while it says inadequate benefits here, this is just a slide, and we are in no way implying that the benefits are inadequate here. That's just, this is a cycle that we see is insufficient staffing leads to poor service. There's a heavy workload, low morale, high turnover, and it just keeps repeating itself. So our priorities, we're recommending an increase of 6 to a staff of 30, which will allow for dedicated supervision, configuration change, provision of EMD, and this staff of 30 could handle text to 911 when the county decides to implement it. So we realize this is not an overnight increase. Training takes how long in your center approximately?
Anywhere from 8 to 10 weeks.
8 to 10 weeks. In some centers, it's 6 to 9 months, so that's good. So it's not just getting the bodies in, it's also getting them trained. And then we're recommending the full-time operations manager or director. And there are other recommendations in the report. These are just the priorities.
What's the trend in the 911 texting? I mean, in other areas, other counties, basically in North Carolina?
Raleigh has done a beta program. All the wireless carriers have it available for when a county chooses to implement it. Raleigh is using a cloud-based service. Durham is also using it. There are other counties along the eastern seaboard that are implementing it.
But it's still very early in the growing stages of it then. Is that what you're saying?
Implementation is in the early stages.
Okay.
A lot of agencies are trying to figure out how they're going to do it because there are different service offerings, whether it's handled like a relay call, like your deaf and hard of hearing relay calls, whether it's done through a cloud service and take them. But it's picking up steam across the country. It's just a matter of what level. Some are only accepting text messages. Some agencies are beginning to accept photos, some videos. But that opens up the whole technical realm as storage. Do you want your dispatchers seeing pictures of crime scenes, crash victims, things of that nature? So it's a whole gamut that has to be explored.
Okay.
But it is out there, and it is becoming a public expectation, especially for the deaf and hard of hearing communities. Then we looked at the facility. Right now there is limited room for expansion there. And the state does have backup requirements, legislative requirements. It is not saying it necessarily has to be a facility, but it will require a county that operates similarly to you do, that's willing to take your calls if you could not. So there are those legislative requirements that will need to be met in the near future. And the report goes into a little bit more detail about the space needs. And I realize that my presentation has gone on more than 10 minutes, so for that I apologize. But you guys have made a...
Blame me, I'm sorry.
No. You guys have made, the county and the commissioners, you have made a significant investment in the county, in the technical infrastructure that's out here with the radio system, the CAD system, everything technically is being done. So we're recommending that you invest in the staff and facilities, you know, to benefit your public and the responder agencies.
Mr. Chairman, one question. While we gather this information, but Chance, did you gather how many wireline customers or users we have in Wayne County now?
No, I did not.
Could we find that out?
You can get that information from the phone, from each of the phone services.
I'm curious, back in '91, we had like 70-some thousand, and I know that probably reduced by 50% based on wireless use now, but just be interested to know that wireless can cause seconds on a phone call versus wireline, just be the fact of all the information that's there.
And there have been estimates that wireline will never entirely go away. It seems to top out at about 80% wireless calls, 20% wireline. The older population tends to rely on a wireline phone, and they don't want to get rid of that.
And also, on your wireline, normally when a call comes in, I'm kind of assuming, when a call comes in on the wireline, you may not get but 1 or 2 calls on it. And with cell phones, you may get a dozen calls on it.
Correct.
Because of just convenience.
Yes, and especially with accidents in the mobile public these days, if something happens and 12 people pass an accident, it's likely that 10 of them are going to call. So it does increase, you know, when wireless calls increase, it's generally because of that. As you read the report, if you have any questions that you need answered, you're welcome to send them to Brian, Mr. Taylor. If he can't answer them, I'll be happy to answer them for you.
Any other questions?
I'm questioned out.
I will, let me make a couple of comments. One, I just wanted to mention to you that subsequent to having the report, one of the things that Philip had suggested, and we took him up on it, is that they bring in an architect to look through, do a walkthrough on our facility, looking at whether or not we could renovate that. And one of the things we found is that we could, that the best means of doing that would be take part of the 3rd floor and basically put a new 911 center there, and then take those operations and put them where the 911 center is on the 2nd floor now. We may have to move a few offices out of the building because it'll probably take a little more space. But we had Dan Mace with Mosley Architects is who they used, and of course we're using them on the jail. But Dan came through, walked through with us, so that is a possibility. Also, there is state 911 board funding for renovations and or new buildings, and we'll be trying to tap that, as well as some of the money we have on hand that's limited in what we can use it for, but we could go to the state board and request release to use some of that money. As y'all know, we have a fairly sizable fund balance there. But the more critical issue is going to be how to fund these additional staff people, and then also trying through policies to drive down the number of calls that we have to handle. So,
And you may ask the question, why move to the 3rd floor and just stay on the 2nd floor? But what I could see the other day when we did the walkthrough, the wall configuration on the 3rd floor is different than the 1st floor and the 2nd floor.
Right.
And it really, if we're gonna move, it really made more sense to move to the 3rd floor, because you would have more room for expansion even later.
That's right.
The wall configuration is just, for some reason, different on that third floor.
I think it's because of the EMS station down below, isn't
Below,
it, Joe?
yes, and the whole configuration from that point up is the same, but first floor is different. But as we approach the 911 board, Mr. Penny, we go up there with an open mind and nothing set in concrete from our side, correct?
Yeah, because sometimes when you get into it, I know Mosley is going to provide a preliminary, when you start actually looking at renovating, especially a higher floor and with all the cabling requirements above floor, under floor, sometimes it turns out to be less expensive to retrofit another facility that may
Correct.
all be on the same floor.
Right.
So I think that's important to not say that that the third floor may be, that's definitely where it's gonna be there. I think there are a lot of other considerations.
Correct.
Oh, I agree. I just wanted to throw out that was a possibility, and
Yeah.
That was just one of many thoughts.
Yes.
that's right.
And if I could, I would just like to add one comment. And you were dead on. There is a concern about the amount of abandoned calls and the calls that are coming into the center that are not considered an emergency. I struggled with this for many years when I was in Raleigh. I was the 911 director in Raleigh. We did campaigns. We did all we could do to try to eliminate some of these calls that we considered were not emergency. But the only thing I would ask you to think about is you try to educate your folks about what an emergency is and what it isn't. What may not be an emergency to y'all is going to be an emergency for my 89-year-old mother-in-law with dementia. So it's really hard to put a value and say, don't call if you can't turn your stove off, because you're going to figure out a way to get it off. My mother-in-law is not going to be able to figure it out, and it's going to sit there until it starts a fire because somebody has told her not to call for that. So it's a real slippery slope when you start telling people, here's what you can call for and what you can't. So it's just difficult. And if we could figure that out, we could bottle it up and sell it. But it's just difficult. And like I struggled with it when I was in Raleigh, and we just had to suck it up and we had to answer those calls. What you want to do is take those calls and process them as quickly as you can and move them on. But to totally eliminate those calls is just not going to happen.
Any other questions? If not, Mr. Wood, Tommy, y'all got it? Y'all good?
You got your job cut out for you.
We do appreciate y'all coming.
Thank you.
Presentation. Very good. I think that it should be mandatory that each one of these commissioners take a radio and have to listen to it for a week.
I'm glad to have, I'm not having it.
We'll arrange that.
I will listen to my radio all the time.
So you listen to Carol though.
Thank you, Bill.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Darty.
there was one matter that I did want to state, and I did not state in my remarks earlier today, but I do want to reach out to a school board member, Arnold Flowers, for broaching and bringing up the subject in regards to a review of district lines. I hope that the other members of the school board will take up that issue, because it's not about necessarily a line, an arbitrary line. It's the correct use of facilities, to maximize the use of facilities. And so I failed to give him a special recognition or saying attaboy, and I appreciate the fact that he took that bold step of discussing district lines in the school system. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else have anything?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, we've had a request from the city of Goldsboro, no money. We've had a request from them that they would like a county member for their downtown development board. I think they've been without one for in excess of a year. It doesn't have to be a board member, but it can be. But if none of you are interested in serving, I was going to suggest that Tommy Burns be appointed to that.
Yeah, good.
And I've already talked to Tommy.
What have you got against Tommy?
Nothing. But all kidding aside, he's been a city manager, so I think he would be a good member of that board because he's aware of what downtown development authorities do and that sort of thing. So if y'all have no objection to that, I'll go ahead.
Would you
and-
like a motion, sir?
Yes, sir.
I move to make Tommy Burns to represent Wayne County, Goldsboro City.
Very good.
I have a motion on the floor. No discussion?
No discussion.
Any discussion? All in favor, show sign of right. Thanks, Tommy.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Condolence. No.
I'm gonna have to have Mr. Woods check. He must have been reading my mind. I was just thinking about that when you said
Who
it.
to do it? Yeah.
Do I have a motion? That's right, we need to recess
Recess.
till 4:30.
Yeah.
And during that time, we'll have our facilities committee meeting.
We're gonna have it in the conference room, or?
Yes, sir.
I'll tell you one thing.